Had no need to fight tonight.
So welcome to this new series. It's where I hang out with my friends and we talk about whatever we want. My name is Mike. This is my co-host and producer, Brittany. Today we're going to be talking about the mental health spectrum, specifically autism and everything else that is relatable to that.
Cool. Alright, so why doesn't everybody introduce themselves with your name and what you like most about working on the spectrum? Or with kids on the spectrum.
Hi, I'm Johnny and I am a behavior therapist with kids and adolescents on the autism spectrum. And what I like most about the work is developing unique connections with each of the kids and just discovering how unique each of the kids is and just making the kids laugh on a daily basis.
Hi, I'm Ruth, and I do the same work as Johnny, so all the characteristics apply. What I like most about working with kids is that I can see them grow. They go through stages, so for example, not talking at all to like being very vocal. And so I like seeing them grow, and I also like growing with them.
I'm Angela, and my favorite part about working with kids on the spectrum is also seeing them grow and like progress in things. But also just like every day is unpredictable, and like you have to think of new ways to like have fun and also teach things, and it's just a really fun, creative job.
My name's Jamie, and my favorite part about working with kids on the spectrum is that they just constantly amaze me. We laugh a lot, and I just really like seeing them grow. It's really rewarding.
Oh. Like, I didn't know that I was also going. I'm Brittany, and my favorite part is probably same thing as everyone else knows. I like what Johnny said though about developing unique connections with the kids. Just, I don't know, everyone, they're so cool, and they have so much to teach me as well. So.
My name is Mike. I wanted to work in the spectrum because I didn't have like a big childhood growing up, so it allows me to like reconnect and have a childhood, but also at the same time like teach life skills that I think are important just for anyone in general, not just kids on the spectrum or people who are high functioning.
I'm Natalie, and in addition to everything that everybody else has said about why we love working with these kids is, for me, a big part of my job is working with the families, and so seeing like the growth and the change within a family, and how autism kind of affects that whole group of people, and how what we do can change their lives and lead to them being able to like go on family vacations and like really enjoy each other to the fullest. Like I think that's my favorite part about this job.
And I'm Esther. Probably the thing I like most about working here is like every kid's so unique, and they've all got like different stories, and coming into that and like really experiencing like what they are, who they are, like is really great to work with. I like that.
Cool. Let's get started then?
Yeah.
Okay, so. First question. How do you engage with the neurodiversity movement in a way that is respectful, but also that stands up to the false and sometimes dangerous information about ABA? Natalie, do you want to talk a little bit about what the neurodiversity movement is?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I think that, so the idea of like neurodiversity is recognizing that there are different kind of neurological makeups, and that, being what we see as neurotypical isn't necessarily the, sorry, I'm thinking of words. It's not necessarily the predominant thing, and it's not necessarily the only acceptable way to exist and be in the world, and it's not the only way that's deserving of respect to be in the world. And I think that's a big part of the neurodiversity movement, is recognizing the value of each person and what they bring to the table, no matter what their IQ or their diagnosis or their social skills or whatever those things are that you can kind of judge a person by. It's looking beyond that and saying that all of these viewpoints are valid and should be included, and not just put to the side and say like, okay, we're going to think about you sometimes, but we're not going to include you all the time. If that makes sense. It's more just about like inclusivity when you're talking about neurobiology and that kind of stuff.
It's hard because when you start talking about ABA, because in my opinion, when it comes to ABA, it's like how we run it is like this is right, this is wrong kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where the movement is where it's like it's not a right or wrong. It's just a way that they learn differently, and we should respect that and like respond to that.
Yeah.
And so, but I think for me, my opinion is there's a balance between those two for sure. I'm not like to the left or to the right of it. I just think that we should teach our kids like certain values, and I think to a certain extent, there's certain things in life that are wrong that you just can't do.
Well, there are certain things that are not functional. There are certain things, and so this is where like there is a spectrum in ABA too, and how people approach it. Where the definition of a problem behavior is something that impedes your learning or your just like basic existence. So something like punching yourself in the head when you get overwhelmed. That's something that like I think we can all agree is not a desirable behavior. But I think where the neurodiversity movement and some ABA practitioners kind of hit heads and disagree is when it comes to things like self-stimulatory behavior, like flapping, or not making eye contact. Like those are some things that some people are like, maybe this isn't the most important thing. Maybe you don't need to focus on this with these people. But some ABA practitioners would argue that those are socially significant things, and I think it really depends on the person and what their goals are and what their personal, who they want to be personally. If you're somebody who really wants to be able to interact with neurotypical people socially, there are certain expectations that they'll have of you. But if you're trying to shift the social expectations, then you may not care about addressing, flapping or stereotypy or that kind of automatic behavior that seems socially weird to people. And so I think it's a matter of like kind of figuring out where we overlap or don't overlap on what is socially significant or a behavior that like should be addressed. And so that's where I think a lot of different ABA providers can probably have disagreements or kind of rub people the wrong way.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with parents as well.
Yeah.
Usually when we start with a new client, we ask the parents like what they want to work on with their child.
Yeah. And I mean, that could be something in and of itself that people have an issue with, because it's like, is it really up to the parent or the kid, and like how old does the kid have to be, or how communicative do they have to be able to tell you like I want or don't want to work on this thing. So I think that's also a place where it can get sticky within like walking that line of like respect versus trying to do the best for someone.
Anyone else ever see?
Yeah, I know Johnny has a lot of opinions on this one, so why don't you
that was super interesting to listen to. I was wondering, so if there's neurotypical and neuroatypical, or what we say like autism spectrum, but can we actually describe that biologically? Because like if you look at an MRI, so the brains look very similar, so you can't differentiate. It just comes out in the behaviors. So can you actually speak of neurotypical if you can't describe it biologically?
There are some biological indicators that have been discovered as far as autism goes, and within DNA they've been able to tie it to genetics and show that it is passed down genetically, and that it may, so like there's examples of twins, and I think it's let me just look up the numbers. It's like 80% of identical twins would have autism if their sibling, if one of the twins had autism, it would mean that like in 80% of cases both would. But with fraternal twins, it was like if one of them had autism, I think it was between like 11 and 15% of who would have it. And so like there are genetic indicators, but it's like we're so far away from being able to really even understand what any of that means.
For me, just the ratio boys to girl is a genetic indicator.
Yeah, absolutely.
By itself,
I think it's higher ratio of girls that are more autistic than boys.
It's 4 to 1 boys to girls at least diagnosed.
And isn't it? I mean, I've heard that women commonly get misdiagnosed with social because their symptoms are a lot more social, and so they get misdiagnosed with social anxiety, or they don't get diagnosed till later in life when they're like, oh, this isn't normal, and they start to realize that for themselves. But like, I feel like, and I don't know, but I feel like maybe if we were able to figure that out more, it might be more of a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah. No, I mean, anecdotally, I have a really close friend who, her brother received services and had a diagnosis as being Asperger's, and it was only this year that she got an official diagnosis and like then got access to services, and she's 29. And it's something that she had to like kind of push for and be like, hey, this has affected my life forever. I can see the comparison to like my brother, but like she was more high functioning and she was able to kind of figure her way around in the world and do what worked for her. But yeah, I think it's there's definitely a lot of misdiagnosing or underdiagnosing happening within women.
Yeah, and actually, like, it's very interesting you brought it up because, like, I've read that, yeah, social interactions or social dysfunctions between boys and girls are kind of different. Some studies I've read that boys are less likely to be more, I guess, touchy than girls. Another thing is that their stereotypy might be different. I've read that for boys it's more like numbers and patterns, but for girls, like, think about like brushing like your Barbie's hair like religiously. So if you think about it, it's kind of common to see it in like little girls, but their intentions are different. So
yeah.
Because for me, it's like the neurodiversity movement. I think if you don't understand autism, there is high functional and low functional, where it's low functional to the point where a lot of parents from the other point see it as how can we help those kids, that is so disruptive to, themselves. Like how do we see that as a positive or something like that? And that's one of the huge arguments when it comes to the movement.
Yeah, is that kind of line and like a language change that's happening right now is moving from saying like high functioning, low functioning to highly impacted versus less impacted. So it's kind of looking at the impact that autism has on the child or the person, and saying that like so a child who's maybe nonverbal has really high instances of tantrums or self-injurious behavior, is really aggressive, that kind of stuff. That would be like a more highly impacted child, where they're more restricted in their abilities by the impacts of autism. So that's just a language thing that's always changing. I think that's part of the neurodiversity movement too, and their influence on what's going on in mental health.
Because we haven't talked about it. What is I don't know it like personally to like the detail, but what is the definition of autism as it currently stands? Does anyone know? Because I don't.
The diagnostic criteria?
Yeah. It's long.
It's long. I mean, it's like, so it's changed in the DSM-5. It used to be broken down in different categories. So like where there used to be like Asperger's, which is what people would say like, oh, like I know somebody who's very high functioning. They have Asperger's. They're just socially awkward. That's still falling under autism spectrum, but it's not distinguished as a different thing now. It's just everything is in the spectrum. But it's mainly differentiated by deficits in communication, deficits in I think sensory processing, and deficits in developmental guides, like guidelines.
And to add to that, so deficits and excesses, so like the repetitive behaviors, extraneous behaviors.
Yeah.
That's also part of it.
Absolutely.
something that I've kind of been thinking about ever since I've been in this field is like how much the line is blurred, as far as like, I feel like we're all on the spectrum, and I notice a lot of things within myself that I never did before I started working with, before I started working in the field, and that like there's a lot of things that I never noticed about myself that I'm like, these are behaviors that someone else may see as like, I guess, different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess that's just something I was thinking.
I've had like a case where it's like, since I've worked like with kids on the spectrum, I understand it now. But like there was an example where someone asked if I was autistic, and I knew if I didn't work on the spectrum, like 5-10 years ago, if someone said that I was autistic, I would be offended. I'd be like, no, I'm not autistic, but I would be ignorant because I had no clue what autism was. But now when someone tells me like, oh, someone asked me if I was autistic, I was like, oh no, I didn't take offense to it because I understand it. And I think a majority of society doesn't understand what autism is. There's like this huge like public where it's used in a very negative way. Like even in like video game cultures, you have little kids like 9 to 10-year-olds calling other kids autistic on like the microphones, and it's like you like how do you know that, how do you learn that? And it's such in a negative view. So that's why part of this series is I wanted all of us to come together and talk about it, just because we're all different races, we're all different like ages and just different like knowledge. So it's nice to have people who work with kids in the spectrum but understand that it's a very unconditional love that we get to these kids. And we all go through some major shit, some of us more than others, but it's all about like when we're there, it's for the kids.
Yeah.
And also like I've had people in my life be like, oh, I can't believe you work in that field, like that's a really tough group of people to work around. I'm like, but they're so special. Like I feel so privileged to work in this field too. And it's like, I don't ever view it like that. Like I just
Like you're doing this
feel
great
really
thing for
privileged.
society.
Yeah, like it's not, I don't view them as so much different than us. It's just like the way that, I don't know.
It's how they
It's
exist
the way,
in the
yeah,
world.
it's just another, it's neurodiversity. It's another group of people who are existing just like we do.
And just as valuable,
Yeah.
and just as important.
Oh, that was perfect timing.
Oh.
See, that was a lot easier to talk about when you just like get into it.
Yeah, that's true.
Into it.
Yeah, that's true.
What?
Starting with the
If
prevalence?
it's like
Yeah.
1 in 60 kids, then I would say it's most families that know someone that are affected.
So Jimmy could just
So in 2018, the CDC, should I be technical or just like not be technical?
you can just read it.
Okay, in 2018, the CDC determined that approximately 1 in 59 children is diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, which is 1 in 37 boys and 1 in 151 girls, which means that boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism than girls. Most children were still being diagnosed after age 4, though autism can reliably be diagnosed as early as age 2. Autism affects all ethnic and socioeconomic groups. Minority groups tend to be diagnosed later and less often. Early intervention affords, should I keep going or is that too much? Early intervention affords the best opportunity to support healthy development and deliver benefits across the lifespan. And there's no medical detection for autism.
So there's
Did
like
we already kind of touch on that?
Yeah,
we
where
did.
it's like,
So
touch
is
on
there
it.
there kind of is?
There
but there
isn't,
isn't,
though.
right?
There are definitely indicators, like researchers are finding that there are certain like DNA strands and certain things, like certain mutations that might influence whether or not somebody will be diagnosed, but it's so far away from being able to like have a test or have like anything that would actually show biological indicators, because they're not even sure if it changes, like if your DNA is changing as you get older, and that's why we're seeing different things. There's also like they talk about a lot of the kids that they see that like really quick decline that have like behavioral indicators of autism. That's actually like a mitochondrial issue that's like a separate medical diagnosis, and so there's like a lot of talk about kind of like how they research autism and how they, like, in 100 years, what we know as autism will probably be a lot of different, like, differently classified things that have similar behavioral symptoms. Because there's so many different, you know, you could have overstimulation or like sensory overload for many different reasons. It might not all be because of the same biological factors. It might be multiple different things that are influencing, and that's why we see such a wide range of behavioral indicators for our kids and our clients.
Like, one of the things I wanted to bring up and have a conversation about is, you know, those numbers are for individuals that are diagnosed, but for me as an Asian American, when it comes to like mental health or, you know, depression or anything, that's not talked about a lot when it comes to the Asian American community, because it's just pushed to the side. Like, if your kid is autistic or something, usually people who, like your parents who come over here as immigrants, they see it as, okay, there's something wrong with the kid, that's it, and they don't get their kids diagnosed. The same thing as mental health. If you're depressed or anything, like I told my parents I've been depressed before, and they're like, oh, okay, you're sad, get over it, you know. So and that happens a lot in the Asian culture. I know me and Esther talked about this, you know, a bit, that, you know, when it comes to people who are getting diagnosed, there's such a huge fear of the stigma, and that some people are too scared to talk about it, or that, you know, they're shunned from society, and it makes them shut down, and not just as, you know, a parent, but they just fear what people think about them. And it's so important because of how you fear about what others' opinions about you, you're not helping your child. Because there's a lot of kids that, you know, when I hang out with their parents or something, and there's like, I think it's very prominent that their kid is autistic, and I'm like, I think I'll hang out with the kid, and the kid is like hitting his own head against his parents, and I'm like, oh, is your kid okay? Like, oh yeah, he's normal, you know, when it's not normal, especially after you work in the field for so long and you pick up on these certain like characteristics and traits. So that's why, you know, I've had a few Asian clients, and that means a lot to me, just because I'm able to translate and have that language with them. But it's also, when I was younger and I was ignorant, I was like, oh, Asian people can't be sick, they can't have autism, and we just talked about the statistics. It doesn't matter about your race or anything. But I think that's really important to address, because there's so many parents out there who, especially in, you know, as Asians, you're scared of what other people think about you, because, you know, it's a very thing that everyone chatters. And so I think if you're a parent and you're like really, and you have that feeling, you should just go to the doctor no matter what. I think it's only a deficit that you're hurting your child if you're scared of what other people think about you. And I don't know, like, we're sitting in a circle with people that are from like different cultures of that, and I don't know if you guys see that or not.
Yeah, definitely. In the Romanian community, it's huge. Like, parents are just like, oh, I mean, there's, you know, like they might guess that something's off with the kid, or they're not normal, they're not functioning the same as the other kids or whatnot. But like this huge, like, we don't diagnose, it's more of a, from my own experience, it's more of a like a religious kind of background where because we're like we pray to God, like we bring our problems to the family and we pray about it. So we would never go to a counselor like for mental health services or anything like outside of what we would deem normal. Like, it's just not talked about. We don't, you know what I mean? Like,
if you don't acknowledge it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True that. And it's just like, I don't know how we like, you kind of learn how to deal with it. You kind of find your own coping mechanisms, or, you know, eventually see a therapist, do your own thing.
I think as like a second generation comes up, it's gonna be more, it's very more having science based. You know, it's more technology based. You understand it a bit more, but you know, it's just like how society views autism right now, and just in general. You know, it's a lot of, because I've been out with the kids in public, and when your kid has a tantrum or start hitting yourself, everyone looks at you weird, and they like almost demonize that child.
Absolutely.
You know, and they're like, oh, are you a bad parent, or like, you know.
What are you doing to this kid?
Yeah, and so it's really scary.
Yeah.
Because like sometimes you just don't know what to do, and you don't know what to say, because you know you obviously have your HIPAA rules and all this, and you have to be professional. So when you're in public, and you know, I've been in public before where I've had friends be like, "What's going on?" Because I was raised here in Portland, and I see people all the time, and you don't know really what to say. You're like, you just sort of had to ignore them because it's like, and their view of it is just so negative. Whereas like, what the heck's going on? You know, the people. I've seen some people on like internet where people like film people like in public and all that, and it's almost like they treat them as if they're not human.
Yeah.
And it's so hard, especially if you work in the spectrum. We're almost these kids' parents. You know, they spend so much time with us that it hurts. You know.
I think that's why it's so important to like educate people on it too, because or like not even educate, but when you know that this is what this person's going through with anything, like it helps your response towards them so much.
Just that empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we see out in the community are like what the big reason people judge is because they don't understand.
Yeah.
So like, why is that kid hitting his head? Is he like, you know, like what I mean, like it's the biggest thing is just not understanding.
Well, and then like going back to like the cultural expectations of it, like some people, they think that it's either like a parent's fault or like it's because they did something wrong, like they take blame for it, and so it's like that's just pushed back on you.
And I think that falls a lot on like in our society as like in America, because we're so individualistic. You know, it's like it's all the blame is on you, whereas like in different countries it's more like holistic and like I don't know, it's kind of a family issue.
Yeah.
But here it's like very
Well, like, so I've had a client whose family is here from Africa, and I remember during the intake, they were talking about how, you know, they kind of had to get used to the idea of a kid coming in and getting this really individualized treatment, kind of in this clinical environment, because if they were staying in their home country, it would have been something that would have been addressed by the community, and it would have been something that would have been like more of a community, not like problem to solve, but just like something where it would be like everybody would be working on it together. And I mean, I think that would be so valuable. I think that the lack of community for a lot of people on the spectrum, families who have kids on the spectrum, and any kind of mental health struggles, I think lack of access to community is one of the biggest issues in like actually being able to sustain a healthy lifestyle.
Well, that's why it's so cool that like more and more people are getting diagnosed and more people like have that understanding of it. And I don't know, I love having like the grandparents and like aunt and uncles come in and just like wanting to learn more and like see what we're doing and like wanting to see how they can like best support their family member. It's really cool.
I agree.
I actually like what Mike brought up, you know, like when we're out with our kids and they start having a tantrum. I mean, like, if I wasn't in the field that I'm working in, like, if someone was, like, tantruming, like, it's so easy for us to say, like, oh, they don't know how to control their kid. But, like, think about it, if you were a parent of someone who has, like, autism, that it doesn't really have a label. You know, all you see is a kid tantruming. So it really is, like, awareness is very important for us to be more empathetic and to be more open-minded about, like, it's just not a kid tantruming. It must be something else.
Well, and even if it is just a kid tantruming, like, we should still have that, like, basic empathy for people. Like, unless you're being, you know, abusive towards your child, like, you know, let's give everybody a break and understand that, like, we're just trying to exist in the world, and, like, you know, we all threw tantrums when we were 2 or 3 years old. Like, I'm sure all of us, like, were in the middle of a grocery store screaming at one point, and, like, if you can just have that basic, like, extend that empathy to people and be like, you're just having a rough day, and, like, I don't need to, like, it doesn't have anything to do with me.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, I feel like, you don't have to, like, know a kid's diagnosis, or you don't have to know a person's diagnosis to be able to accept them, like, how they are. Because, like, everybody has different coping mechanisms. Like, everybody, like, there's certain things that, like, maybe people on the spectrum are gonna do that are different than, like, I don't know, other people. But, like, it's just, like,
that's how we cope. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
No,
It's
everybody
just
has a
something
different
that we
way of
all-
coping.
Yeah, like any of us, like if we have a hard day, we're all gonna we're gonna deal with it differently. Like some of us are gonna go home and just want to go to sleep. Some of us need to like listen to music. Some of us need to go, out with our friends. Like we all have different ways of coping, just like they do.
Yeah, and I don't think that
Yeah.
like their ways of coping are wrong or less than. They're just different, and that's okay. Like that should be something that we should always like look, for especially when we're working with the kids, like vocal stereotypy or physical stereotypy. Like that's something I think that kid is like feeling inside that they're expressing out like physically, so that maybe we don't do that. Like we were taught in a certain way, like this culture brought us up like this is how you behave in school, this is how you behave in a store, and whatnot. But like, so what?
Yeah.
Like,
But the thing is that it's really only certain stereotypies, because like twirling your hair is a stereotypy. Like
yeah.
twiddling your thumb.
I'm doing it right now.
Yeah, like bumping
I'm doing something
your
right now.
feet, like
Yep.
fidgeting. Like all of those are stereotypies, but they're just socially acceptable ones.
Right.
And like I sing to myself while I cook dinner, and I don't even think about it sometimes. And like that's a like that is an automatic thing. Like I'm not thinking about doing it. I'm just doing it, but it's acceptable because I am a professional and I have a degree, and like whatever, you're just eccentric. It's not a problem. But like all of those things, like everybody has stereotypies. Everybody has those things, and it's just whether or not like overall society has deemed them
Normal,
acceptable.
right? That's I think since working here, it's like what is really defined as normal.
Yeah.
Also, what we like train our kids, or not, I wouldn't say train. That's a really bad word to say. The way we like educate and teach our kids to be like, I know me and Johnny talked about this, right? What is normalized, when and this comes back to neurodiversity movement. Like every kid learns differently.
Yeah.
But and then that's why the question is why is it sort of bad with ABA? Because ABA, like I feel like I don't know, it's hard for me to do entirely everything as protocol because some of the stuff is like it's life skills. You should learn how to do this. It's not just it's like okay, let's learn how you can
understand why.
let's learn why, and then how you can adapt that to actual life skills that you can take home one day and like learn and use with other individuals, your family or whatever. But it's hard to just see that. And this is so hard, and this is huge compared to this spectrum, but it's almost like a society thing. What is deemed normal,
Yeah.
Because I'm weird as F,
Yeah, same.
But yeah, so it's, I don't
It's
know.
like I've learned things. Like I've learned that like getting head squeezes feels awesome.
Yeah.
Like if I feel overwhelmed, I will ask my husband to squeeze my head. Like there like I need a sensory break every now and then. I need I've also learned things where I'm like everyone should do this. Like we all need a silly sound break.
Yeah.
Like adult silly sound breaks are karaoke.
Yeah.
Like just like those kinds of things that really can help you feel better, and like having those habits of emotional health, like recognizing that like seeking that sensory input is important.
And I think there are like a lot of similarities in like a lot more similarities in neurotypical people and people who aren't neurotypical than like that you realize more when you work with them too. Like you're saying like the stereotypies and stuff, and we can learn a lot from them because like I don't know, when I first started working here, like I've dealt with a lot of social anxiety my whole life and just like talking, and like a year ago I wouldn't have done this at all with you guys. But just like being in that job and reminding my kids like, oh hey, it's okay to go up to people and be like, hey, can I like hang out with you? Can I play with you? Then I'm like, oh, I can do that.
Yeah.
And it's like I struggle with that too, even though like for some reason I'm more like accepted in like a normal society. But it's, I don't know, I just think we can all learn from them.
Same. I learn from them every day. Like every day, I learn things about myself and.
I think it.
Do you need us to clap?
Yes. 1, 2, 3. Sorry. What's going on?
She's like, really? Was that necessary?
I feel that we could.
Alright. Should we start?
Okay. Can you recommend a good board game for 5 people to play, bearing in mind 3 are autistic?
Yes. So a lot of my extended family is on the spectrum, and when we get together for for holidays, we have rousing games, which is just playing board games or card games and stuff all together, and there's just like, it's always running. So a few of our favorites are Space Team, which is a collaborative game. There's what else were we doing? We were doing Sushi Go. That can be really fun. It's a pretty simple one. I know that I've played Dungeons and Dragons with clients, and that's been really fun. They've really responded well to that. I think being able to build a character is really engaging and can facilitate a lot of like social growth, and kind of give somebody like, I don't know, when you have like a set personality that you have to act as, and like, you know, certain things that are laid out and kind of like on a page for you, it's easier to interact socially. So it kind of gives rules for interactions that people really enjoy. And then Bananagrams can be a fun one. It all depends on kind of what people's strengths are. I mean, as in with any game.
Mm-hmm. I was also thinking it didn't specify age,
Oh,
so maybe
yeah.
we could talk about like kids and
Oh
adult
yeah.
games.
So I was gonna say like.
I didn't plug the mic in. It's still recorded.
So I mean, like for kids, like I know that at work, a lot of times like Uno is really popular because there's a lot of different ways to kind of like, you know, colors and numbers. There's different ways into that. What about you guys? What games do you use really well with your kids?
One of my clients was obsessed with Uno. And in the summertime, we'd go to the park like every day. And it was the best. And it's cool because it has so many different ways to play. So, I don't know. Make rules.
I think the Jenga is really cool. I mean,
Yeah, that's
I
a
don't
pretty
really-
simple
yeah.
and like
I think that's pretty.
accessible too.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know about you guys, but I love Battleship when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't
Battleship's
played
a hot
like
take.
with any of my clients, but it.
No, I've had clients that like Battleship
Yeah.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Shoots and ladders, or like any kinds of like more simple progress games. Candyland, yeah. Life's a bit much.
Yeah. True that.
But yeah, there's a lot of really fun like collaborative games now that are out for younger kids, where it's like it doesn't have to be super competitive. It's more about like just doing something together, like building a trail or like finding a treasure, doing something like that. So
Trades.
yeah,
That's the
or like
best.
heads up,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Feed the Woozle.
Yes.
I love that.
Yahtzee.
Anything where you get to be silly
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
is always good. Okay. Moving on. What is it about my daughter and her unwillingness to flush? Does it have to do with sensory processing disorder? Anyone?
Well, how does she react when she?
We don't know what's
Yeah.
doing, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, we can, like,
It's hard to
more
answer these questions.
details.
when it's
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
out.
I mean, maybe we could talk a little bit about sensory processing disorder if anybody has like a good explanation of what that is.
So there's actually this is one of the things I bookmarked.
Oh, no, goes that one.
Sorry, friends. So there's different ways that sensory like processing can differentiate, and so I'm trying to see who it is that did this. So basically, there is like sensory seeking. So that's like you want a certain kind of sensory input, which can either lead to kids being inattentive or like hyper focused on that one thing. So like Ruth was saying, it can be in excess or as in like or it can be a deficit. Then there's sensory modulation. So that might be something where it's like under responsiveness or over responsiveness. So like that might be like when you hear the alarm at school, you start crying because it feels like somebody is drilling into your brain. Like that sound really bothers you, it creates a reaction in your brain that's really overwhelming. Or if somebody's talking to you or trying to get your attention, you don't process it as that's what's happening. And so you don't respond when somebody says, like, your name, that kind of stuff. And then there's also, there's, like, movement sensitivity. There's, like, all of the different senses that can be overwhelming. So, like, some kids are really receptive or, like, really affected by physical touch. Some kids are really affected by, like, sound. Some kids are really impacted by, like, textures and foods. Like, it can really depend on the kid. So, I mean, if it's a sensory processing thing with flushing the toilet,
There's
yeah,
a lot going on.
it's so individual.
It's scary.
It might just be a
really
scary
think about
sound.
really think about what's
Yeah,
happening when you flush the
absolutely.
toilet. Like,
Yeah,
there's
it
a lot.
can be scary, and so it's more about identifying what part of it is upsetting, and kind of working through how you can make it less upsetting for her.
And how many of us know kids who like are scared to flush the toilet or even going on the toilet? You know what I mean?
For
It's
sure.
like,
Even just looking
I'm
at
stuck.
the
My kid's gonna
toilet.
fall in the toilet again because I flushed it out. Yeah, it happens. Okay. Just takes 1 foot, you know, and it might get stuck. You never know. You think it's like.
All right. Let's do the next question. I really like this one. I was recently offered an interview at a well-rated company for a behavior interventionalist position. The lady who did a phone interview with me mentioned that the children we'd work with may bite, kick, or hit you. This makes me anxious. Sorry, the question's worded a little bit funny. But they're asking, how common is this issue?
of like aggression or like.
Well, it's gonna depend on the kids you work with and the individual, and like, you know, because
But I think all of us have gotten
Yeah.
bit, kicked,
Yes.
hit, spit
Yes.
on, pooped on,
Mm-hmm.
peed on.
Yeah.
No.
Not yet. No, not yet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's only a
Just
matter of
you
time.
wait.
True. I've been there 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, I've been punched.
It's not for the
Yeah.
weak of faint. What is it?
Faint of heart.
Faint of heart.
I remember, like, when I interviewed for the position that I'm currently in, and the person told me, you know, there is a possibility, it doesn't happen all the time, but that you could get bitten or scratched, and I was like, oh, okay. And I really didn't know what that meant until I was in it.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's training that we go through that teaches us how to deal with certain things that happen, but it's never going to fully prepare you. And I think that you just kind of deal with it. I don't know, like, I guess in the moment, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I feel what
But,
you're saying.
I
for
just,
sure.
it's like, I think the first time it happens is going to be the most intense, and then you just kind of like, you understand how it's going to feel in your body, and it's just a matter of being prepared for it. But like, every kid's different, so there's always going to be new things that come up that haven't happened before. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, you can't really prepare for it beforehand. Like, it's just I don't know.
I think a lot of people, it's like, if there was like a bully or like a gunfire, people always act like they're gonna be the brave ones in that, but when it actually happens, you're like shocked for a minute, and then you're like, what do I do? You know, I think there's always that slight shock. That was when it happened for me. I was like, whoa. I was like, didn't know what to do. I just had to ask other people for help in that. So
And it's a matter of like being supported by those around you, and just like taking care of yourself after it happens. Like, we're all human, so you don't have to be like 100% brave about it, or you don't have to think that like you're going to be so strong that it's not going to affect you at all. Like, it's going to.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of taking care of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything. I remember my cousin works, I think, for like a marketing agency or something, and she was telling me how she was so stressed out, and like when she first started at this job, she like went and cried in the bathroom because her boss was like really scary or something. And I'm like, yeah, I cry at my job too sometimes, like after I get choked out. It's like, I mean, everyone laughs because, like, you guys know,
Because
obviously.
it's happening.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. I think that it's important that I don't know, like we're so used to it and we can laugh
Yeah.
about it, and it's like almost you know it's just another
just
day
part of our
at the
job.
office.
Yeah.
I also,
But sorry, it's also important that like I think all of us know this too, and like the reason that we can handle it is because we like take care of ourselves, and like we have the support, and we like know when it's too much, and we can like I don't know.
Speak up and tell someone that it's too much and that you need to step away or that you can't do it in the moment. Like you have to ask
Yeah.
for support. Yeah.
And I mean, part of that is also like having respect for those kids and not engaging with it as though it's like a personal attack and like
yeah,
not
yeah.
like so when I feel myself reacting as though like this is like a personal thing, as though this kid wouldn't do this with a parent or any other therapist, that's when I kind of have to like check myself and either like ask for a break or like really try to like recenter myself and be like, okay, what, like, you know, I'm here for this kid, we're supposed to be working through this, like this is why we're here, and like not thinking of it as like I did something wrong or I like this is my fault or this kid hates me, because like none of those things are going to be true. It's just about like being in that moment, not taking it personally, and then like decompressing afterwards and like not holding it in and not holding like a grudge against that child because they're a child.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think it also helps to have like just your coworkers, like anyone in this field is gonna be very supportive of their coworkers because we all can empathize in like what the job is. And I know when I first started and I was like had sessions with aggressive clients that were tough, I had people in the break room like asking, hey, like, are you okay? Like, what happened? Do you want to decompress or whatever? And like that really helps just to know that like your coworkers are there to support you and give you tools and like help you process that and like prepare for it next time and all that. And it's a good resource.
Like when I started like almost 2 years ago, it was kind of like that. My first experience with aggression, I felt like I had to be like really professional and not be affected by it. But once other people started talking about their experiences and how it affects them emotionally, like it felt like it was okay. Like it happens, you know. So.
Yeah, I mean, you can't not be affected by it.
Right. Yeah.
That being said, though, I don't think that the job is for anybody, like for anyone.
Yeah,
Like,
you have to have
yeah.
a certain amount of like emotional endurance to be able to like interact with people who might aggress towards you, might say things to you to like try and get a rise out of you, and like see past that and like continue giving them compassion, because I think it's really hard, and if you're really working through a lot of things where maybe in the past people haven't shown you compassion and you don't have that experience, I think it would be really hard for somebody who you know, maybe is working through a lot of personal issues or is like working through a lot of personal like anxieties. I know that we've had people who have started this job and then have kind of realized that like it's not going to work for them because, you know, they're just not at a place where they can be experiencing that much adrenaline on a regular basis. Like it's not good for their extended mental health, and I think that's a really important thing to just kind of like look and see. And that's why like at our office we encourage people to get training so that they can have their hours divided up by like, okay, you're doing like 75% of your time is doing direct therapy with kids, and then like 25% is going to be working on a project that's not going to be direct, so that you can have a little bit of decompression and taking that step away, because doing this for 40 hours a week is really taxing, because it's intense.
Yeah.
And another thing too is that when I've experienced like some of those aggression, like some of my clients were aware that they were aggressing, so you have to show them that, hey, I still like you, we still have fun, you know. So I think that that's very important to remember when it happens.
Absolutely.
I think that something I had to learn, working with a really aggressive client when I was kind of newer in this field, is that like I'm overly empathetic towards other people, so I was always like very, I felt bad, like I felt so, I don't know what the word is, like I was overly like concerned with like the client that I was working with and not giving myself any like space to feel things and not really checking in with myself. So there has to be like balance of you taking care of your client and taking care of yourself as well. It's really important for sure.
All right.
Next question.
Next question. Let's see. A lot of these we like already covered.
Yeah.
Just chatting. Let's see. This one's kind of personal, so I don't know. And everyone's at a different like place in their life, so I think it'll be good. But have you seriously reconsidered starting your own family after entering this field? Anyone?
It's such a difficult, different. I don't know.
I think so. I mean, like, I've had that, I was open to having kids even before I started working, but I think that after working in the field that I'm in, it's like I think that I'm a little bit more equipped to handle certain behaviors. So, or maybe it won't, I don't know. Like, maybe when I have kids, I'll be like completely crazy.
I think it's interesting to think about because I think if I had kids, it would, like I wouldn't be able to do this exact job.
Yeah.
Like the position
I agree.
that we're in.
I think it would be really, really difficult. It's always surprising to me when I meet technicians who are also parents. But oftentimes the technicians that I've met who are also parents have a kid on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And they were introduced to ABA kind of through their kid, and then they had the passion for it. So
That makes sense.
Why is it hard? I mean, I'm just trying to understand. Like, why would it be hard if you had a kid and you were working? Like, what would we do? Is it the emotion?
What you're giving to your job versus what you can give at home. And that's just like an assumption. I don't know. Like, if that's why.
yeah, I mean,
It might
that's
be
always kind of
difficult.
how I've thought about it. Is that it would be really hard to kind of give all of that individual focus to a child all day and then get home and continue doing it. It would be like you are never not working.
Yeah,
At least
I feel
for
the
me,
same way.
that's the concern that I would have for myself, is that if I had a child, I would have a hard time kind of like having a boundary between who I am at work and who I am as a parent.
Sometimes at work I feel like I am a parent.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. That's what I was
And
thinking.
and it's like only a fraction.
As much as you don't want to take your job home with you, like, the clients are a part of my life, and I do kind of like have a part of them with me when I'm not at work.
Yeah.
And that's just.
I think the part that would be hard for me, or maybe I should rephrase it, like, the reason I'm able to do this where I'm at in my life right now is because when I go home, I do what I need to for me, and I don't have, like, anyone else to take care of. And I think that that's what would be difficult, is, like, like, having that same caretaker role when you go home and not being able to just, like, do what you need for yourself.
Johnny, what did you want to say?
I'm so excited.
All my batteries are different colors, so it's so hard to figure which one.
Does this need to get
Mike,
plugged
do you
in
need
now?
help? Do you need help with anything?
No.
Okay.
Mike doesn't need
I don't know anything about this. Thought I just
He's an
thought-
independent guy. He can use his words. Use all your words,
Excited
Mike.
about this weather. Me too. I know. I'm like, a skirt.
It's amazing.
What is this?
I know.
So great.
It's like getting dressed today.
The
and being
weather.
like, I can
Just
wear
the
a
weather.
skirt without putting on tights. It's the most glorious thing in the world.
I'm like, I guess I'm not wearing overalls.
Gotta get
My
some shorter
daily.
rolls.
Sure.
Okay, Johnny.
So I understood the question. Is it like, would you reconsider having your own family in terms of like, would you have a kid that would be diagnosed with autism, and that, would you change your decision based around that? Like, would you be scared of that? That's how I understood the question. And I think working with kids on the autism spectrum or individuals with autism, I think it definitely changed my mind in terms of it reinforced me wanting to have kids and not being afraid of that, because now I could say like, okay, I'm somewhat ready for this, or I could say, okay, I know how to approach this, versus like 3 years ago I wouldn't have even known what that means, what to be scared of, or like I would be totally confused and be like, I would listen to a lot to what other people say, versus now I have an opinion about it. I know where like I would understand how like the urgency, like do something quickly about it. Versus that's also another topic. Like a lot of parents like from us come in like age 4 and they have like, oh, I still need this device for my kid, and they're like, wow, you should have. Why so late or so? Not a topic, but yeah, I would. It even like the job reinforced my decision to do family, like for me personally.
I was gonna go off your tangent there.
Everyone clap.
1, 2, 3.
So what you were kind of saying was like, you would be more excited to have kids on the spectrum, but also like I think the importance of like what we do as therapists is discovering and understanding what the functions of behaviors are, what we deem problem behaviors, in order to like give the appropriate consequence, so we know like the purpose of this tantrum is for attention or escape or tangible or it's automatic, you know. So understanding that really helps you like determine what you need to do when that happens. But putting that in perspective, like I feel like understanding that and getting that knowledge from like working in this company is like it helps me understand like why any kid would tantrum, you know.
Yeah.
Like to
Well,
deal
like
with it.
the function, understanding the function of behavior works for every single behavior that occurs at any time. Like me moving my hands right now, there is a function to this behavior. It feels nice. Like all of us, when we do things, there is a function for it, and like, you know, it's also partially attention. Like, hey, look at me. But like, it's funny because when you start learning about that, like functions of behavior, like I remember at least when I started training for this job, I'd never had any classes like that before, and I remember like being at the grocery store and like watching kids and their parents interact, and like watching people like getting impatient in the line, and like just seeing all of these like, you know, potential like just watching people be people and looking and being like, oh, everything you do has a function, and like understanding that, and it's like, and then I don't know, it's like we're all just primates. Like you know, we're evolved primates, and like I think that a lot of like what Jane Goodall has worked on, like I really resonate with her as like a ideological role model, because she's just been able to kind of like look at, like observe things and not be so like her work is developing things but not changing them fundamentally, and I think that's like what we're really supposed to be doing in ABA, is that like we're developing these kids and we're helping them be their best selves, and we're helping them like be who they can be, but not changing fundamentally who they are.
Right.
And like not changing that, like, you know, what you love or what you're interested in or what feels good to you, and like we're not trying to change that. We're trying to make sure that they can be the best version of themselves and have the most access to the world that they can have.
It's hard with that because it's like we grew up with so many standards that like there's so many like rules that are taught to us but never like explained or like really like in depth, like this is why we do this, like we don't talk in church, or we, you know, sit in a desk at school, or we do, you know, you raise your hand if you want to talk, like those kind of I don't know what to call them, like,
Expectations.
Yeah. Like
Social norms.
Yeah, exactly. Social norms. Like, I feel like kids maybe on the spectrum or like people on the spectrum don't understand that because I don't, like it's
or
hard.
it's just not important to them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's true.
Yeah.
But
I
it's
think sorry.
no,
I
go
didn't mean
ahead.
to cut you off. I was just gonna say that this job has like made me question
Like
certain
what's important.
importance of stuff like that.
Right.
You know,
No, but it's
like
just like
why can't we talk?
yeah. No,
or
I get-
why do I need to have this kind of behavior?
Yeah, it's just like these unspoken like expectations that are put on us, and like if we don't fit that, like people are just like, whoa, like what is happening? Like confused,
Yeah.
like I don't know. It's kind of like you step away from those people, like you don't want to engage with them,
Mhm.
and it makes you look weird. Like I don't know. There's so many.
I mean, like there's so many ways to like deconstruct that too. Of like, you know, a lot of those expectations are to teach kids to be like good workers, and like a lot of that stuff that you learn as a kid, and those like social expectations and social norms are for you to like be a productive person and productivity, and it's focused on like being somebody who like can contribute work to society, and like so a lot of why people devalue somebody with autism or like some other kind of like mental disability is because they can't be productive in society, and they're not going to make money, and they don't have a skill necessarily that can be monetized and sold. And so like that's also part of like kind of looking at what those expectations actually, what are the function of those expectations, you know, why am I supposed to sit down at my desk if I'm going to be, you know, somebody who is always moving? That's not a skill that I really need. But at the same time, you know, it's expected of you in most schools, and so it's just kind of like looking at those expectations and being like, why is this here?
Right.
Do I care?
Yeah, and it's, I
Yeah.
feel like what I was trying to say is like it's built into our society where there's no like it's not very lenient. Like there aren't specific, you know, like besides therapy or like individualized supports that are, you know, there's not a lot of training for like a typical teacher for working with kids with autism or anybody in with mental health or anything like that where they kind of are able to cater to an individual student. Like it's very like broad, like this is how I teach my class, and I'm not gonna teach it the way you learn. You know what I mean? It's like everybody, I feel like, learns so differently that we need more of a system where like everybody can learn the way that they learn best, you know.
Definitely.
Yeah.